Amidst the hills of the region of Shunem, there was a woman whose name was not recorded, but whose faith and generosity have spanned the centuries. She lived with her husband, an elderly man, in a comfortable home. They had possessions and stability, but what really distinguished this woman was something that could not be measured in possessions: her spiritual discernment and a welcoming heart. Elisha, the prophet of God, often passed through Shunem on his ministerial journeys. It was a time marked by spiritual turmoil in Israel, and the presence of a man of God in the villages and cities brought both hope and fear. When that woman noticed Elisha's constant passage through her city, something stirred within her. It was not curiosity, nor simple politeness. It was faith. Subscribe to the channel for more exciting Bible stories and turn on notifications so you don't miss any videos. If this content touches your heart and you want to support us, feel free to click on the "Thanks a lot" button. All help is welcome and makes a big difference. With tact and respect, she approached the prophet and invited him to a meal. She did not do so with fanfare or ulterior motives, but with sincerity. And so each time he passed through Shunem, Elisha found in that house a place of rest, warm food, and an atmosphere of peace. Her husband, though discreet, consented to his wife's gestures, trusting her sensitivity. Over time, the gesture became a habit, and the habit became a bond. But for the woman, it was not the man, Elisha, who attracted her, but the presence of God that she discerned in him. Without any formal education, without any religious position or title, she identified holiness with a simplicity that only the pure of heart possess. Then one day, she expressed a new desire to her husband: to build a small room on the terrace of their house, especially for the prophet. A modest space with a bed, a table, a chair, and a lamp. That was all he would need. That woman sought no reward. She only wanted to honor the presence of God in the way she knew how, with hospitality. Unbeknownst to her, with every gesture, she paved the way for one of the most silent and powerful miracles in Scripture. With a determined heart, the Shunammite woman set about creating that special room. To many, it might have seemed like just another room, but to her, every detail was meaningful. It was a silent way of honoring God's presence, represented by the servant he had sent to her home. The room was built on the terrace, a more private and quiet place. There she placed a simple but clean and carefully made bed. Next to it, she placed a table sturdy enough for Elisha to write or read the sacred scrolls. A chair was left nearby, and a lamp, carefully filled with oil, completed the space. Everything had a purpose, even though no one but her fully understood the depth of that gesture. There was no luxury, but there was reverence. There was no ostentation, but there was dedication. What that woman offered was more than a place to sleep. She offered rest for the body and repose for the soul. She offered silent welcome without demanding words, just space for the prophet to continue his mission with dignity and comfort. Elisha, upon returning and seeing the room ready, understood that this gesture went beyond courtesy. He was deeply touched. It was unusual for someone to show such care without seeking anything in return. The prophet now had a refuge in that home, a place of peace amid the many spiritual battles he faced in Israel. Gehazi, his servant, also noticed the different atmosphere in that house. It was as if God himself was present in the delicacy of the furniture, the silence of the walls, and the purity of intentions. Elisha slept there not only with his body at rest, but with his spirit at peace. In the simplicity of that room, God was preparing something greater. And without even knowing it, the Shunammite woman was writing with her actions a story that would become eternal. It was the kind of faith that asked for nothing, but was ready to receive everything. And when heaven decides to respond to that kind of faith, it always does so in surprising ways. One afternoon, while resting in the room the Shunammite woman had prepared, Elisha was overcome with a feeling of gratitude. That woman, without ever asking for anything, had become a silent support in his ministry. He called Gehazi, his servant, and asked him to call the woman to speak with him. She approached respectfully and stopped at the entrance to the room. She did not cross the threshold, nor did she invade the space he had prepared with such care. Her gaze remained serene, and her posture humble. Elisha then asked her through Gehazi what he could do for her. He offered to intercede with the king or the army commander, but she refused. She replied that she lived in peace among her people, satisfied with what she had. But Elisha knew there was more. After she left, he asked Gehazi if he knew of any need she had not mentioned. The attentive servant revealed she has no children and her husband is old. It was an absence that the woman carried silently, without murmurs or complaints, an ancient pain kept in faith and resignation. It was then that Elisha sent for her again. When she stopped at the door, the prophet uttered a word that sounded impossible. "At this time next year, you will be holding a son in your arms." The woman, overcome with surprise and fear of being deceived, replied sincerely, "No, my lord, man of God, do not lie to your servant." That promise had touched the deepest wound in her soul. For years, perhaps decades, she had learned to live without hope in that area. And now, without asking, hope was reborn in the form of a promise. But Elisha did not back down. The word had already been spoken. It was not a wish, nor was it consolation. It was a prophecy, and once God spoke through his servant, nothing more needed to be said. The woman returned to her routine, her heart restless and her spirit torn between the fear of believing and the faith that sprang up even without her wanting it to. On that quiet afternoon, something invisible was sown, and time, obedient to the God of promise, was already beginning to move. Months passed, and the Shunammite woman carried the living promise in her womb. Each day was a silent reminder that God had not forgotten her. Her body changed, her hope grew, but her heart still wavered between gratitude and reverence. She knew she deserved nothing, but even so, she was receiving everything. In the season appointed by God, the boy was born. It was a quiet birth, but one full of meaning. The baby's cries filled the house that had previously been marked by the silence of waiting. Her husband's eyes, already tired from age, now shone with the miracle he held in his arms. The woman, as she gazed at her son, did not say many words. She just held him firmly and tenderly, like someone who knew the value of what had been entrusted to her. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The boy grew up healthy, playing in the fields, and joy spread like a new perfume throughout every corner of the home. That son was not just a personal achievement. He was the fulfillment of a promise made by God, a silent testimony of what he can do for those who honor him without self-interest. The Shunammite woman, with the same sobriety with which she had built the room for the prophet, now cared for her son with zeal and devotion. She did not forget where that life had come from. Every gesture of affection, every sleepless night, every smile from the boy was treated as a sacred gift. And even without fully understanding God's plans, she lived one day at a time, without demanding guarantees, just trusting. When Elisha returned to Shunem, he could see in the woman's eyes and in the boy's joy the faithful fulfillment of the word he had spoken. He did not need to be reminded. God himself had written that story in silence, and now it was unfolding before everyone's eyes. But the time that had brought the promise would also bring new challenges, and that mother's heart, molded in faith and surrender, would still be tested in ways she could never imagine. The boy grew up strong. He was curious, cheerful, and often accompanied his father in his work in the fields. The landscape that had once been marked only by crops and servants now also had the light footsteps of the child, running between the sheaves of wheat, asking questions and charming the workers with his smile. On that day, the sun was shining brightly. The blue sky suggested no change, no sign that something was about to happen. While his father supervised the workers, the boy approached, staggering, bringing his hands to his head. The pain had struck him violently, like an invisible blade. My head," he cried, his eyes squeezing shut in agony. His father, frightened, ordered a servant to take him back home. Perhaps it was just too hot, he thought, but there was something deeper going on. The mother, upon receiving her son in her arms, realized the gravity of the situation. She sat with him on her lap, trying to calm him, offering comfort that no words could contain. And there she remained, for hours, holding him, praying silently, waiting for the pain to pass. But it did not pass. At noon, the boy stopped breathing. The promise lay lifeless in the arms of the woman who had never asked for anything. There were no screams. There was no commotion, only a thick, deep silence, as if time had stopped to respect the mourning of a mother who had decided not to despair. She did not call her husband. She did not announce the death to the neighbors. She got up firmly, went up to the prophet's room, the room she herself had built with faith and love, and laid her son's body there. Then she calmly closed the door. The same space that had once been a place of rest now became an altar of silent hope. She went downstairs, asked her husband for a servant and a donkey. She said only that she needed to go to the man of God. When her husband, puzzled, asked her why, she replied with just one sentence: "Everything is fine." In that answer was a faith that does not deny pain, but chooses to trust even before seeing the miracle. Without wasting any time, the Shunammite woman mounted the donkey with the servant at her side and set off toward Mount Carmel, where she knew Elisha would be. The road was long, the sun scorched the earth, but nothing would stop her. Her feet did not tremble, and her heart, though wounded, beat with purpose. There was no lamentation on her lips, no despair in her eyes. She carried her pain with the same dignity with which she had carried the promise. She ordered the servant, "Don't slow me down unless I tell you." It was a journey of faith that had to be made in silence. She didn't want explanations or comfort. She just wanted to get to the man of God, the same man who had once spoken the promise that had changed her life. If there was any hope, it was there that she would find it. Each step of the donkey brought her closer to a reunion that was not only human, but spiritual. The path that cut through the desert also crossed the depths of her heart. And the woman who followed in silence carried within her something greater than pain. She carried an unshakable confidence that even death had failed to break. From a distance, Elisha saw the familiar figure hurrying toward him. He immediately noticed that there was something different about her posture. He called Gehazi and asked him to go to her and ask if everything was all right with her, her husband, and her son. The woman's brief and firm answer echoed with the same serenity as before: "Everything is fine." But when she finally reached the prophet, she could not contain herself. She fell at his feet, clinging to him tightly, like someone who had kept everything inside for too long. Gehazi tried to pull her away, but Elisha stopped him. "Her soul is in bitterness, and the Lord has kept it from me," he said. Even though he was a prophet, he did not yet know of the tragedy, for God had chosen to reveal everything at the time of that woman's faith. There, at the feet of the man of God, without demanding anything, without accusing anyone, she threw herself, not only physically, but spiritually. And in that silent surrender, the miracle began to move again. Still kneeling at Elisha's feet, the Shunammite woman kept her eyes fixed on the ground. She did not beg, she did not raise her voice, she just let her pain be felt without words, like a restrained river that, even silent, carries devastating force. Elisha watched her in silence. He, who had so often heard the cries of crowds, now saw the deepest faith manifest itself in restrained gestures. Then she spoke. Her words were not of rebellion, but of remembrance. With a firm voice she said, "Did I ask my Lord for a son? Did I not say, 'Do not deceive me'?" It was as if she were saying, "I did not ask for this dream, but I trusted when it was offered." Now it has been taken from me." Elisha understood in an instant all that had happened. The weight of that pain hit him directly, and his reaction was immediate. He turned to Gehazi and ordered urgently, "Gird up your loins, take my staff and go. If you meet anyone, do not greet him. If anyone greets you, do not answer him. And put my staff on the boy's face." Gehazi left quickly, taking with him the symbol of the prophet's authority. But the boy's mother, who knew much more than rituals and sacred objects, did not move. She said firmly to Elisha, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." She did not want just a gesture. She wanted the prophet's presence. She knew that only he could be the channel of the life that had been taken away. Faced with her determination, Elisha did not resist. He got up and went with her. They walked back side by side, the prophet and the woman who had not given up on the promise. There was no conversation. Each carried in silence the intensity of what was to come. When they finally approached the house, the atmosphere seemed different. It was as if time had been suspended. And at the top of the stairs, beyond the closed door, lay the body of the boy, the same one who had been prophesied, the same one who now waited silently for a divine touch. When Elisha entered the house, the atmosphere seemed heavy with a thick silence, as if even the air waited in reverence. He calmly climbed the stairs to the room he knew so well, the same space where he had rested so many times, and where now lay the lifeless body of the boy. The door was closed. Elisha was left alone, with the promise that seemed to have been interrupted. He approached slowly and saw the body lying on his own bed. There was no movement, no color in the child's face, only the cold silence of death. Elisha knelt down and began to pray. It was not a hurried prayer, nor was it full of formulas. It was a deep cry from a man who knew that only God could bring an answer. He asked with his heart, without noise, because he understood that the deepest miracles are born in intimacy. After praying, he approached the boy's body and lay down on top of him, eyes on eyes, hands on hands, mouth on mouth. It was not a magical gesture, but a symbolic one. He identified completely with that pain, with that life that needed to be restored. It was as if he were saying with his whole body, "Lord, transfer life, restore breath, breathe your spirit again." The boy's body began to warm up. There was a sign, albeit small. Elisha got up, walked around the room, lay down again on the boy, insisting, interceding persistently. There was no rush. He knew that faith requires perseverance. Then suddenly the boy sneezed, once, twice, 3 times, 7 times, and he opened his eyes. The miracle had happened. Elisha stood up, called Gehazi, and sent him to fetch the mother. When she entered the room, she saw her son standing, alive. She did not scream or run. She just threw herself at the prophet's feet silently, with the same reverence with which she had sought help. And then she took her son in her arms. In that room where faith, pain, and hope had met, life shone again. There was no crowd, no applause, only the whisper of the miracle sealed between a mother, a prophet, and a God who hears even the quietest cries. With her son back in her arms, the Shunammite woman descended the stairs with steady steps, but her heart was in deep reverence. Nothing in her countenance revealed euphoria. It was as if she had known from the beginning that God would not allow the promise to end in silence. The miracle, still fresh, enveloped the house like a sacred perfume, one of those that need not be announced, only sensed. The boy, now alive, did not understand what had happened. His eyes sought his mother and his arms wrapped around her with the innocent trust of one who knows he is safe. For him, the pain was gone. For her, faith had triumphed. Gehazi watched everything with a mixture of amazement and admiration. Elisha, for his part, sought no explanations. He knew that this was the work of the God who restores, who honors silent faith, who responds with life where there was death. It was more than a sign. It was confirmation that heaven moves when hearts bow down in sincerity. The woman made no fuss. She did not go out into the city announcing the miracle. Her testimony was discreet, like her entire journey. She preferred to keep what God had done in her heart, just as she had kept the promise from the beginning. For her, it was not necessary to convince anyone. The proof of God's faithfulness was alive, walking beside her. As the days passed, life in the house resumed its rhythm. The fields were cultivated again, the servants returned to work, and the boy ran among the wheat fields. But everything had changed. The house, once just a home of peace and generosity, was now also an altar. Every wall, every piece of furniture carried the memory of a faith that had crossed the valley of death and returned with life in its arms. Elisha, as he left again, knew that he was leaving behind more than just a memory. He was leaving a living testimony of what God can do when he encounters genuine faith. There was no need to say much. It was enough to remember the look on the Shunammite woman's face when she came down from her room with her son in her arms, serene, grateful, full of reverence. The story of the Shunammite woman is not just a miracle story. It is a profound portrait of faith that manifests itself in silence, of trust that requires no explanation, and of obedience that makes room for God to act. In her simplicity and reverence, this woman taught us what it means to truly believe. She did not ask for a son, but she received a promise. She did not protest when pain came, but walked to the prophet with conviction. At no point did she allow tragedy to nullify her faith. Instead, she protected the promise with actions that spoke louder than words. She prepared the room, laid her son where the miracle began, and sought Elisha without allowing despair to rule her decisions. Her faith was active, not passive. She acted, moved, insisted, but all with balance, humility, and confidence. She knew whom to turn to, and because she did not despair, she was able to experience something extraordinary. Today, we are invited to look at this story as a mirror. How many times does God give us promises we did not ask for? How many times does life surprise us with unexpected losses? And in the face of this, what do we do? The Shunammite woman shows us that we do not need to understand everything, nor do we need to be in control of every situation. We need to know where to place our trust. Faith does not prevent pain, but it transforms the way we face it. The woman from Shunem did not cry out, she did not accuse, she did not blame. She acted in faith, and through this attitude she saw life return where everything seemed lost. May our faith be like hers, silent but firm, discreet but unshakable. May we learn to build rooms for God even without knowing what He will do there. May we know how to climb stairs with our burdens, close doors to despair, and open our hearts to the impossible. Because the same God who heard that mother still hears the hearts that believe. If you like the story of the Shunammite woman and want to continue following other stories of faith and overcoming, be sure to like this video and share it with those you love. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content. Together, we will explore more powerful lessons from the Bible.